Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Azure Takeoff Show. And today we have with us Tashwar. Hi, Tashwar. How are you?
Good. How about you, Hatim?
I'm doing amazing.
Yeah.
So, Tashwar, we have a great content which we have recorded in the past. We
Mhm.
saw about virtual machines. We saw about the networking part of it. How do we do it? What is the next topic which would be really beneficial for our audience?
Sure. That's a very good question and a very good topic that I have in mind is actually how to create more resilience. Actually, so now we talked about VMs, we talked about virtual network, and there's a sea of like Azure services, right? That we could talk about. There's going to be millions of videos that we could do,
Yes.
but like let's focus on a little bit on the resilient sides of it. That we have, we know how to create a VNet, we know how to create a VM sort of thing, but how do we make sure that our VM is mostly up all the time, sort of thing. Like it doesn't go down. So what are the options of thing? So what I really wanted to talk about is actually something called highly available availability options, basically for Azure VMs. What kind of things we could do for making our VMs more highly available? Okay, so what is highly available basically? So when we think about highly available, it's like when there's an event of a hardware failures, which happens in real life too. I mean, you could have things that malfunctions, especially in like these data centers and stuff. There could be things that malfunctions, or you need to update, or you need to like there's an outage of some sort. There's no electricity or something like that. You need to make sure that your machines are up and running and available, right? So what are the options that we could possibly provide from Azure for people? So what I'm going to be covering is actually three things. One is called availability sets that you could do with VMs. Second thing is availability zones that you could actually use. And then the third thing is actually proximity placement groups. So we'll cover that a little bit later, but like it's sort of like placing things that require a lot of low latency close together. That's what you want to do.
Okay. So my question here, Tashwar, is when we talk about high available, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't the hardware and everything is covered by Azure if you are hosting this VM on Azure?
So it does, and that is called an SLA. Basically, you have
Yes.
a SLA to it, and you have certain percentage of SLAs. It's not like 100% SLA. So your
Okay.
machine does not provide you with 100 SLA too. My laptop does not provide me with 100 SLA. So there's a percentage as Azure. Every cloud provider has this. They have a SLA service level agreement that they will provide you a certain percentage of uptime basically.
Okay.
Now, there are certain ways that you could actually make your uptime to be higher than what we
Okay.
provide, for example.
Clear.
So we'll go through those kinds of designs of how to actually get your uptime higher. So
Clear.
the very first thing, as we mentioned, was availability sets. So okay, what does this actually means? It actually eliminates the hard. If there's a hardware failure, you could actually have two machines. So basically, availability set, it's like this. We'll show a demo of this too afterwards. You have two virtual machines. You would still have a load balancer with it, but you're saying these are the availability sets. So if you have two or more or five machines if you want to do. So what it allows is basically when there's a network outage in, let's say, one of the racks, it won't affect you on the other rack, sort of thing. Or if there's a
Okay.
hardware failure or something like that. So it gives you a little bit more of a resilience of it. So if there's any power interruptions or anything like that, so maybe the rack has a power supply and the power supply fails, it won't affect you to the other one. That's what it is. Basically, you would have two machines or more, two or more machines, and you would actually have a load balancer in between it. So this is a little bit of a manual way of doing it. There are other options too. And the best practice, actually, as we speak, is actually to use something called virtual machine scale sets. So these
Okay.
are the recommended way. But like I mean, they're this is the future sort of thing. That's what we for best practice. But I will be covering this in a later show because it's a lengthier. What are the options? How you could do it? How do you automate it? How do you get an event and all that stuff? We'll cover that later on. But as I wanted to mention is this is the best practice of actually using the virtual machine skill sets. So okay, how does Azure infrastructure accomplish like when you actually go to the console and you say, okay, I want a VM, a Windows machine, or a Ubuntu machine, a Linux machine, or anything like that, what actually happens at the background of Azure is actually there's something called Azure Fabric Controller. So what it does is like it actually asks the racks, the machines, hey, where can I place this machine? Okay. So and then the controller basically places the VM on that specific machine. Now there are certain types of machines too. There's something called fault domain. Every of these racks, we call it fault domains. And there's also something called update domain. Well, I'll cover it in the next slide. Basically, again, like fault domain and update domain, right? So what are the steps that actually happens in availability of a machine? Is like there could be planned downtime, right? So that Microsoft is planning to do an update of the machine, and we notify you, hey, team, you are running a VM. We plan of like, I don't know, January 3rd, there's going to be an update, so you know about it and stuff, so you plan accordingly. And there's certain things that are unplanned downtime too, right? That like there is a machine and it starts breaking. So I mean, like the hard disk could be failing, power supply or the network somehow is failing too. So those are the unplanned downtime that could happen to any cloud provider, basically, any data center, even your own data center, that could happen too. Now, what are the available options? Basically, we went through availability sets and like there are availability zones too. This kind of like gives you a full landscape of like what's going on. So you got on the most left, there is like right here, you got the single VM. So a team wants to run his own web server. He could launch his own single VM. And what does he get? He gets a 99.9% SLA. Okay. So he could basically have out of 365 days, I think it's 1 day that he could there could be a downtime for it. Awesome. Okay. Now, if he wants to be better off, as in like, hey, I want to be more resilient, then he could run it into availability sets, basically what we call, which we're talking about as we speak. So he could run, and then what does it do? It increases his SLA to 99.95, which is pretty good too. So you have more than one machine, and it kind of fits into the update domain and the fault domain too, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And what's the next level up sort of thing? I want 99.99%. Then actually it becomes availability zone, which we'll show it in our demo too. Like you could actually run it in different, let's say you run it in a UAE. If you're running a UAE Central, you could have UAE Central North, which is your availability zone, so that you could actually have the machine over there. So now you have to consider there might be a little bit of latency in it, a little bit, not too much, because UAE is close enough sort of thing. Yes. So, I mean, it won't be too far. And we have fiber network connecting it, but it's not going to be as fast as like everything within the proximity of like different racks, right, connecting to each other. So, okay. And the last option, if you really want like full resiliency sort of thing, then you're talking about data residency. So you could be thinking about things like, I have it in Qatar also too. Do you understand? So my main data center is in UAE because people shop. I'm in e-commerce and people shop in my e-commerce site. I want in UAE. But what if there's a sandstorm and like electricity went out, sort of thing? So now you actually are thinking regional sort of thing. Hey, Qatar actually has a data center too. I could actually have it in Qatar and be over there too. Now, there is a downside. You might be actually because having more costs if you have both system up. Okay, so your e-commerce could be big, right? So you might have two system up, then you might actually have an increased cost. But there are of course options for it. You could actually run it as a pilot light. So you don't need everything up. You don't need 50 machines up. You could have one or two machines up. And if there's a failover, then you start ramping up all the machines. Sort of thing. So that's why we call it a pilot light. Or the other option is like, hey, you know what? I want to reduce my cost for sustainability sort of thing, not use so much carbon footprint. You could possibly think about, I could have the replication ready sort of thing. So whenever I could have a downtime of 15 minutes and I tested it within 15 minutes, I could get Qatar up and running due to my backups and all that stuff. It would be automatically fail over and I got in 15 minutes, everything up and running. Then it could be a business plan that you think of what to do. So in any case, go ahead.
So there is one question here. Are there any preferred region pairs available? So for example, you can say that, okay, there is no direct connection between UAE and Qatar, but if you connect UAE to West Europe, I think that you will get a better latency when you want to host your services in a cross region. So is there any regional pairs available?
So most of the data centers already have regional pairs, but it all actually the question comes back to your own business sort of thing. Due to data residencies that we deal with every day, sort of thing, some customer data needs to remain within the country, sort of thing too. So you might want to think about like what places are closer, or you might have businesses that are in Europe, for example. Then
Yes.
you might actually want to have the option of having it in Europe too, so that because your headquarters, let's say it's in Amsterdam or whatever, but you have an office over here in Dubai, and you want to be able to like, hey, get that up and running too. So you still need to test out the latency sort of thing. So I mean, latencies, no matter how much you think about it, there is going to be latency, but you need to test it out. Is it acceptable or not? Okay, we talked about fault domain, right? Okay, what is this fault domain sort of thing? If you think about a physical hardware, like a rack, like we see this picture over there, domain, fault domain 1, fault domain 2 sort of thing. So it's just a rack, basically. We just call it a fault domain. So what does it help? It's actually mitigates the hardware. So think about this rack over here. There's going to be a power supply there. There's going to be some kind of network connectivity over there too, right? So what if this fails sort of thing, right? What happens if this fails sort of thing? I want my VM not to be here somewhere in the middle. I want it to actually be in both sort of thing. That's where the availability sets actually helps you out with it. And there's also something called update domain. We have fault domain and update domain. These are the two things. And an update domain is actually a logical group. So it's not really a physical group. It's more like a logical group. But it's more like remember how I said there's going to be an update that will be happening to the machine and we actually let you know. This is basically the update. Like it's kind of like a rotating update because every machine needs an update of some sort. Like their power supply, even though we think it's not software, there is a firmware that's running there. We might need to upgrade it. There might be a hard drive firmware that we need to upgrade it, and it might cause you a downtime. Or the network too, right? I mean, you hear about hacking and all that stuff. If the network layer has a firmware or something, and hackers are able to exploit it, then you need to update it. So again, like I mean, these kinds of rolling updates actually happen, and that's why we have these update domains. So these are logical operations where the fault domains are physical sort of thing. You can think of it. And the fault domain has 2 usually by default, and the update domains usually have 5 sort of thing, 5 domains. And in the next slide, I'll show you like basically when you have a VM, let's say you use the availability set, you see the first one goes into the first machine, and the second VM goes into the last machine. So you kind of like balancing out sort of thing. So you have 2 machines, your web server, for example, the web server is running on 2 separate machines. So if one actually gets an update, it won't affect you in the other one sort of thing. Or if one actually has a hardware failure, you still have one running sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then for here, there's the limitations too. You could have up to 100 virtual machines. Okay.
In one availability set.
Exactly. So you actually, the default setting is 2 again, as I mentioned, and the update domain could actually go up to from default is 5 up to 20 basically. So now here on the right hand side, you see here that we have got like 5 machines, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, Web 4, Web 5, right? So I'm going to be running it in the default domain sort of thing, fault domains. But you can see that I'm running on 0, I'm running on 1, 2, 0, and 1 sort of thing. So I have 3 machines sort of thing. I've set up the fault domains to be 3. So the web server is running on this machine, that machine, third web server, and the fourth one is going to be running back on the 0, 1 sort of thing. So three racks. Think of it that way. So that if there's a failure between rack 1, I still have 0 and 2 up and running, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about update domain here, you see update is like 0, 1, 2, and then 3, 4, because I could have up to 5 sort of thing. So now if there's a update of 0, it doesn't affect the other one. Do you understand? I still have FD1, FD2, FD0, or FD0 is still there, but I still have 2 up and running sort of thing, or 3 actually in this case. 1, 2, and then back at 1 sort of thing. So the updates, when it happens, it doesn't affect my machine sort of thing, because usually we tend to have the updates that doesn't take down your machine, but you never know too, right? But the update domains is the one that actually goes in that throws. So you got the physical machine, and these are logical collection of like your machines.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's availability sets, which we'll do a demo of, and I'll show you how to create it in the Azure portal too. But I also wanted to cover availability zones. What are availability zones? We kind of mentioned it too. Like it's basically physical data center somewhere else, sort of thing. So it could be like it could be a yeah, UAE Central, UAE North, South Africa Central, South Africa North, like all these other kind of or East US and Central US. These are basically availability zones that you could possibly use. You could have your machine hosted in one data center, but you're saying that the zone, because they don't usually all of these have like 3 zones at least, minimum of 3 zones. You could say that my VM is going to be in zone 1 and the other VM is going to be zone 2 and zone 3. So because these are physically away places, usually let's say there's a flooding in one region of the country, it usually would not affect the whole country, sort of thing. Usually like there's a separate area that is like kilometers away that we have another data center, so it won't affect the other country. So if there's flooding that actually affected the powers and all that stuff, you still have the other machine that is running in another data center within the country, sort of thing. So you could actually place them in different zones. So as I said, natural disaster is one, civil unrest. So I mean, if there's a civil unrest, people are burning down things, which happens these days too. It at least like your business is continuing. And the last thing I wanted to cover was the proximity placement. Basically, this is really like if you wanted to have like really low latency and like machines really needs to be close to each other, then you actually can use the PPG, we call it proximity placement group. Say that these machines, these VM scale sets needs to be right here close to these other machines. So you could actually physically say that these machines needs to be closer together because they require really low latencies, basically. Yeah. So now let's go to the exciting part. Let's jump into it. So team, as you can see, we're on our portal right now, Azure portal, and I'm going to be searching over here. Let's just go availability sets right here. So I'm going to click on this, and I don't have anything right now. It's empty. Okay. So I'm going to click on create new one. Okay. So we're going to choose back our Azure Takeoff. That's the resource that we always use. I love the resource. And we're going to call it, as we always call it, Hatim. Hatim AZ. AS. Well, Hatim availability set. Okay. So this is what I'm going to call it. Let's make this capitals so that looks nicer. And as always, I'm just going to run it in US East sort of thing. You could only choose one, too. You cannot choose multiple. So the availability sets has to be within one region.
In one region.
Yeah. So I'm just going to click on review and create. So it's going to be Hatim availability sets. I'm going to create it. Great. So our deployment is succeeded. It's complete. So we now have availability sets. Now, one thing I wanted to note is like your existing virtual machines cannot join availability sets. You need to create new ones to actually join this. So what we're going to do is actually create a VM.
So in that case, if we have a setup where one of our virtual machines is already existing, so there's no possibility of adding another one and then creating an availability set, right?
So yeah, the existing ones cannot be added to it. It has to be a brand new one. Now, let's say you have an existing one, but you've scripted it, that you actually have a base image sort of thing. Then you could create a VM base image and copy it directly from there. That's another option for it. But like usually, if you already created VM and you don't have, if you didn't create availability sets, then it won't actually work like that. So here again, we're going to choose our Azure Takeoff, and I'm just going to call it Hatim Web 1, for example. This is a web server. I'm just assuming it. Now here, that's the availability options that we see. So you'll see right here, availability sets. So we could click on this, and it's going to provide us with the option of it. So here you could see availability set of Hatim sort of thing. So we could pick the one that we actually wanted to create. Now I wanted to go back over here and show you some other ones. There's something called availability zones too. Okay. So in availability zones, you remember how we talked about if you're using availability zones, you could choose zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. There's usually 3 zones. So by default, what happens? Everybody chooses zone 1, right? Because it's right there, the first one, right? So if you think about it, wouldn't the first region, the first data center be packed full of people? Like seriously, everybody's just gonna default click and like choose zone 1, and that's good enough, right? But actually, I would say Azure's smarter than that. So every subscription has different zone 1s. So your zone one
Okay.
team is different than my zone one. So you could actually find out from analyzing it which zone actually went to. But your zone
Yeah.
one is different than my zone one. So not like everybody's just cramming into one zone one sort of thing. So that it could be distributed between it. So that's the
So
nice thing about it. Yeah.
So the question here is, we don't get to decide which zone we are putting in. So, for example, I have two zones here in UAE North and UAE Central. I don't get a chance to decide that which zone I want to put in. It's just a generic name.
You could actually, there's a way to analyze it too, but you need to use
Okay.
some tools to actually analyze which zone actually you are going into. So
Okay.
there are ways to actually analyze it. It's a JSON document that you have to look
Okay.
at, which is from your subscription. You figure out which
What is zone one?
zone that you exactly what is zone one means for your subscription.
Okay.
My subscription it would be very different too than yours.
Yeah.
So that zone one, what it means for me could be north, and zone one
Okay.
for you could be central, or we could be
Yeah.
both in north, for example.
Got it.
So this is the one of the ones, and I'm gonna choose back the availability zone. We also have the virtual machine scale sets, which we're going to be talking about next time. So here I've choose the availability sets, and I'm going to choose a team. I'm just going to create a Linux machine, $95. I could afford it right now because it's just a demo. There you go. We have deployed our machine, but let's find out if it's in the availability set. So let's go back to our home and let's click back on availability sets. Remember how we created the Hatim availability sets, and we look at it. There you go. You got Hatim Web 1 that is running in the
It's
availability set.
running.
Now we could create
Okay.
another VM and choose that because as you remember, we said it's manual. You have to do this manually. So you would have to create another virtual machine, put it in there, and then in order for you to actually to load balance it, you have to put a load balancer in it. But now it's actually running in a set, basically. That's pretty much
This
it.
will be
This is like- Mhm.
this will be easier maybe if we do it via an infrastructure as a code. Then correct?
Exactly. If we do it with infrastructure code, it would be like a click and then it's done.
Yes.
Showing it in a console, at least people could visualize it, how actually it's done. And then if they want
Correct.
to code it afterwards, people could usually do it using ARM templates or Terraform or something. So this
Yeah.
gives you an idea of like what's how to create availability sets and how to create VMs into it. Hopefully this helps everyone. Next time we'll try to cover virtual machine skill sets where you don't actually need to manually create VMs inside of it. So that would be cooler.
That's great.
Let's
Amazing.
go through that one next time. Thank you, Atim.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Tashar, for sharing how we can actually have highly available virtual machines. And I think we'll wait for the next episode where we learn more about the availability zones.
Yeah, sounds good. Take care.
Cool. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.